to be worth $2 billion over the next 10 to 15 years. Much of it would have been used to develop a competitive advantage in the sector. The object was to partner with industry to achieve a step change in economic performance of our primary industries. I regret that one of the first things the national government did when it took office was to cancel both the Research and Development Tax Credit and the Fast Forward Fund. Moving against science and research will weaken our ability to emerge from the global recession stronger than we went into it. Despite the government's decision, I am encouraged by signs our primary sector industries will be the key to recovery. At one end of the spectrum, of course, is our wine industry. Most of you, like me, that remember back to the 60s, remember a thing called Deli Plonk. Haven't we come a long way since then? And this year marked a milestone in creating $1 billion a year in export products from an industry that 20 years ago scarcely exported anything. At the other end, Fonterra's recent announcement of a further increase in its payout, I know, was very welcome news to many of you here. It'll ease the pressure on dairy farms and it'll deliver a substantial boost to the New Zealand economy. This performance has been really good news in the recession, and it's been boosted by the solid progress in trade agreements that have been initiated and concluded over the last couple of years. As we saw when I went up to Beijing to sign the free trade agreement with China, there is strong bipartisan support for such trade agreements. Labor and National have pretty much worked hand in hand in this area on trade issues because trade and competition fuel the economic dynamism and the innovation that lifts productivity and the standard of living of New Zealanders. That China deal, which was the first time China had entered into a free trade agreement with any OECD country, will see within about another 10 years or less the elimination of tariffs on almost all of our trade, 96%. And we followed that up last year with concluding the negotiations with ASEAN and Australia that will see tariffs on our exports worth over $4 billion a year to the ASEAN countries reduced by 99%. And the results of such trade agreements are already coming in. One of the things that has really kept us going when the world has been deep in recession is the fact that our exports to China over the last year went up by a magnificent 61%. China is actually now our third largest trading partner. And what I liked most of all was while our exports went up by 61%, our imports only went up by 15%, so we're narrowing that gap. But it's been very fortunate for New Zealand that the Chinese definition of recession was to continue at 7 to 8% growth per annum. Since last year, the government has now finalised a number of the trade agreements that I'd initiated and was working on with Malaysia, Hong Kong and the Gulf Cooperation Council. All of those will go a long way to securing our future in coming decades, and mostly because of the emergence of Asian economies. You're probably aware that Asia Pacific today represents about 60% of global GDP and about half of all international trade. 8 of the world's 10 fastest growing economies are in Asia. In 6 years from now, Asia middle class populations will total 400 to 800 million people, rivaling the middle class populations of Europe and of North America. So this truly is an important market, and we are well positioned to prosper in it, in part because of the trade deals, but also because you are efficient farmers. It's common for dairy products used in Asia to be produced from confined cows where the feed's brought in to feed the cow, and the feed is often imported. The cost structure can't easily compete against New Zealand's farming products, nor can they meet the growth in demand. I remember sitting down with the Chinese Premier in Wellington, and he said to me, "My goal is a glass of milk every morning for each Chinese child. And I said I very much welcomed that, but I doubted that we on our own would be able to meet that level of demand. The demand is rising, and I think it gives us confidence in the future. Certainly among the Asian middle classes, the demand for protein products and dairy products is bound to increase quite markedly. On other trade deals, I would expect that we'll make good progress over the coming year in the free trade negotiations with Korea, one of our most important markets. And I also hope that we make good progress with India following the successful conclusion of the study that Kamal Nath, the Indian Commerce Minister, and I set in train about 18 months ago. Trade with India, by the way, went up by 100% last year, but of course the high tariffs exclude most of our agricultural products. It won't be an easy trade negotiation, but getting that through will have a really significant impact on our trade with India. I want to say I was also very pleased to read President Obama's speech in Tokyo last week, where he made a commitment on the part of the United States to continue the negotiations on the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Really pleased, because that was something that I started off with the then US Trade Representative Susan Swab, and something that I think will have a huge impact on New Zealand's trade and on our prosperity. It promises, on one hand, a high-quality free trade agreement with the United States. That's going to be important for us. But more than that, because it is seen as a trade agreement that will grow beyond the current P4 that we have with the United States, bringing in Vietnam, bringing in Australia, bringing in Peru. But I think gradually it'll be a bottom-up process that will encompass the way in which we can achieve a regional free trade agreement for the Asia-Pacific region, and in that I include Latin America. I met a couple of weeks ago with the United States Trade Representative Ron Kirk and the Assistant Secretary of State Kurt Campbell in Washington, and I was very pleased at the positive attitude shown by both of those people towards New Zealand and towards progressing that agreement. But the challenge really lies in getting support from Congress and rebutting the strong opposition of the US dairy lobby. After we reached the agreement to begin the negotiations for the TPP last year in Washington, I went up on the Hill, and on the desks of the senators and the congressmen I talked to were letters from the national milk producers in the United States, claiming that Fonterra was heavily subsidised by the government, and indeed the government even built its factories for it. That's the sort of prejudice and nonsense that we will get from that lobby. It's kind of curious, because Fonterra has a very close relationship with the US dairy industry through Dairy Farmers of America, and we actually market most of their milk powder now internationally. But it will be a fight. It is a fight that we will win, because strategically the United States needs a free trade agreement to make sure that it is part of the growing and most economically progressive and dynamic area in the world. And China probably wants to keep the US out of that. They need this agreement.